Well, good morning, everyone, and welcome to our July Council meeting. We have Roger on Zoom from sunny Brisbane, I think.
Good morning. Yes, thank you.
You can hear us. That's great. Thank you for that. Excuse me. We have apologies from Hazel and from Liz for lateness. So can I have a mover and a seconder? Susan and Claire. All those in favour?
Aye. Aye.
Contrary? Carried. Okay. Disclosures of members' interest. Do we have any? No, nothing. Sorry, Marcus.
The last item, number 22. I'll leave room for that.
Oh, okay. Yep. Thanks for that, Marcus. So that's the only declaration. Thank you for that. So moving on, item 3, it's late items. Do we have any late items today? No. Thank you. Confirmation of the order of the meeting. There's no change. Thank you, Lou and Graham. All those in favour? Contrary? Carried. The only potential change is for with Dr. Stephen Finlay talking about the community boards, not changing the location in the meeting, but he might or might not get here due to the flights out of Wellington, so he might have to zoom in. So that's the only change that I have. So council's updates on attendances at meetings. So if we could just keep those to the important meetings attended quickly around the room, or whatever. Claire, if you want to start, I'll try and get everyone.
So I had the privilege to go to the local government conference here at Palmerston North last week, and it was an excellent conference. Lots of really a big focus on the future, and especially about decision making for Mokopuna. So much more longer term, and looking at how Māori might be more involved in decision making in that. So and we had a session on resilience. How to be more personally resilient. So no, it was excellent. Thank you.
Thanks, Claire. Lou?
I also attended that conference with Claire, and as I say, it was a good conference in a lot of ways, but I do feel that we didn't have any chance to have any questions or discussion or answers. We had, for example, Ngāne Mahuta stand and speak, and the Prime Minister, but there were no questions. No one could ask a question or even have a statement, and I felt that in the current economic climate, that could have been something that was quite important to raise, and we have some issues that, as councillors and council, we need to raise. I felt, but that was the only thing that was against what I felt. But other than that, good conference, and certainly the subject of looking into the future was quite important. So yeah,
thanks, Lou. Bruce.
I think Your Worship. I attended 2 meetings, the Taronga Community Associate AGM, and the basic meeting was ho-hum, but the Taronga Fire Chief spoke, and that was the interesting part at the beginning. And that even though under the new fire service fence, Taronga is still classified as a rural fire brigade, they don't have breathing apparatus. So in theory, if there's someone trapped in a house in Taronga, they have to wait till TA to wait for them to get there. So I asked the question, well, what's the cost of one of these sets of breathing apparatus? He said they need 6 and something like 20,000. And he said, and that's what he's fighting for with the national body. So they can be self-sufficient, they can do that job. And so it's quite an interesting fact that they can't go, they can put out the fire, but if there's someone screaming, they're trapped, they can't go in. That's 6 minutes or 10 minutes wait. So that was just an interesting bit of information. I also attended the ComSafe AGM, both of those meetings AGMs. There were about 15 members of the public at that, which was interesting. Gina Scott was there from council. Just some interesting figures. During the last year, they travelled 10,478 Ks. They attended 200 incidents. The training for the volunteers, as I said, was 70 hours. Admin was 507, and they assisted the police in the 1,090 hours actively helping the police. So those are volunteers, use of the vehicles, which is a cost, but just helping the police. So some interesting figures, but it was going well. Thank you.
Thanks, Bruce. You having Graham? I'll go the other side of the room. You okay? Yeah. Andrew, Phil?
Yes, thank you, Your Worship. Yeah, like some of the others, attended the conference. It was a really good opportunity again to continue cementing the relationship with other councillors and mayors and CEs around the country, and listening to their views, which are various issues and views and things like that, which are very similar throughout the country, and how they manage things. There's also other representatives there, including NZTA and David Spears, and him and I are working on a particular idea that for safety measures around the Karapiro mobile petrol station there. So it was an idea that I put to them, and looks like that we can get that together. So that was a really good discussion. So it was great going to the conference. Thank you. It was also attended the webinar for the dog bylaw a couple of weeks ago, and then yesterday there was the local government resource management Zoom call as well. So and then other community meetings. So thank you.
Thanks, Phil. Marcus, you all right? Susan?
Through you, Your Worship. Yes, I attended the local government New Zealand Limitless Local webinar, along with, I think Andrew's attended some, as has Claire. I've noticed your names there. It's a really interesting series that they're running in terms of the future for local government. And there've been some really thought-provoking and quite mind-expanding kind of presentations, particularly by Lynn Carson of New Democracy, which you've referenced in our earlier discussions, I think, Andrew, at other meetings. Really, I really encourage you to sort of dial in on those. They're quite interesting. And I understand they're actually recorded, so if you go into the LGNZ website, you can find them, and they're really well worth a bit of a listen. They're only an hour long, so it's not a huge investment of your time. Also attended along with Mayor Jim, the Cambridge Chamber of Commerce long lunch, which was awesome. It's nice to see the town hall filled with lots of people. So big congratulations to Kelly Bezaid and Araha for organising a lovely celebration.
Thanks, Susan. Mike, anything? Okay, well, thank you for that. Roger, no, you okay?
Yep.
I'll try and keep an eye up there, so
I'll shout up if need be.
Yeah. Okay, so look, from my perspective, yeah, the conference was probably the important event for the month as far as I was concerned, and I suppose it is probably a watershed for local government in terms of the proposed changes that are in the wind, and almost definite, I would suggest, although still haven't given up on the three waters, which a lot of people seem to have. But look, RMA, Future for Local Government, Indigenous biodiversity, all of the legislative changes that are coming down the path. And it seems to me we just need to be really up with the play and keeping an eye on what's going on, because a lot of it is unfunded mandates that are coming down, jobs for council to do, and no money coming along with it. And the other issue is I suppose, the governance, co-governance model that's being talked about. And it concerns me that it's not being well thought through and I suppose communicated to the community what it actually means, because there's a lot of fear out there, I suppose, in terms of what could potentially come from that. And unless we have an informed discussion in the community and actually understand it and get to grips with what it means, then I think we're just going to end up with the issues like Three Waters, which ended up in almost a race-based debate rather than actually the principles that we're trying to get across, I suppose, in terms of a better water supply. Whichever side of the argument you're on, we all want good quality water and environmental standards, but the debate seems to always get hijacked at the moment between this co-governance argument, and it's the same as coming with the Indigenous biodiversity national policy statement, with the talk about, I suppose, iwi hapu having kaitiaki guardianship of significant natural areas and things like that, with no discussion about how that's going to be funded and imposing on private property rights. So it's going to generate that, as I say, that fear out there, which doesn't need to be there if it's properly thought through and properly mandated. So yeah, look, there's a lot coming down the path. It's going to be hugely challenging, I suppose, for the next 3 years. But look, it's open for discussion, and as I say, we've just really got to keep up with what's going on. I know we've got a huge amount of work on, but we can't afford to let any of these issues slide under the radar without having a good discussion about it. So yes, look, it was a good conference from that perspective. Lou, just on your comments about the questions, it would just have got completely out of control, I would suggest, in terms of timing, with the number of questions when you have keynote speakers with an audience of 400 plus people trying to get questions going significantly. Would be a real challenge. Yeah.
Answer that. My thought was that the 3 panelists that sat there were very, very well controlled and didn't ask any awkward questions or questions that we would like to address. So we were cut out of that loop completely. Yeah. And I just felt strongly that perhaps someone that was not totally groomed in that situation would have been probably advisable.
Yeah, I certainly go along with you. I would imagine there would have been a whole host of questions, but really hard to manage in that sort of size organisation. Anyway, thank you for that. So we're now on to item 6, confirmation of the minutes of the 28th of June. So that's on page 9. So can I have a mover and seconder to receive those? Claire and Bruce. All those in favour? Aye. Contrary? Carried. So quickly going through those minutes. Page 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, and then we're on to all of the charges. 9, hopefully there's no changes there. 11, 12, 13, 14. I'm just going quickly through. We went through these in a fair bit of detail, so I'm not anticipating any changes. 13, 14, 15, 16, 17, 18, 19, 20, and 21. And Claire's happy, we're all happy, and any typographical errors, thanks Claire. So if there's no corrections or discussion on those minutes, can I have a mover and seconder to true and correct record? Andrew Marcus. All those in favour? Contrary? Carried. Documents signed under seal, item 7. Gary, that's just 2 warrants.
Thank you, Bishop. Yes, just 2 warrants for one a contractor and the other a building compliance officer.
Everyone happy with that? Andrew moves, Marcus second. All those in favour? Contrary? Carried. Thanks, Gary. Item 8, water reforms, better off funding. Gary, do you want to introduce it, or?
Well, so effectively, we've been handed a process to follow if council wishes to take advantage of funding that is currently on the table. That process will require us to consult with iwi prior to bringing back a proposal for this council to consider. And in an ideal world, in my view, we would have waited for the spatial plan to be completed. But there is a small risk, I guess, that tranche 1 is currently available. Now, the National Party have said that if it's elected, it will effectively stop the water reforms in its current state. And under those circumstances, tranche 1 may disappear. That's a small risk, I think, but it is a possibility and something you should bear in mind. So on balance, the bill is before the select committee, the reforms are proceeding, and on that basis, staff are recommending that we proceed with the process to consult with iwi and then bring a funding proposal back to you. So with that introduction, perhaps pass to you to work through this.
Kia ora koutou, and through your worship. I think there, as Gary's outlined, there's a number of risks associated with either taking or not taking this funding, and certainly the one that's outlined in terms of, if we defer the decision whether that funding is still available alongside the second tranche from 2024. At which point, the risk being that our community misses out on some of those opportunities that accrue from delivering those projects. Some of the other risks, though, are equally that, if other councils do take up the funding, there is an expectation that at least a part of this cost will come back and be a charge against water users in the future, some of which will be members of our community, which in some way would be paying the cost of those projects delivered in other areas. The risk, and as I say, so that's a risk if we don't take it up, acknowledging that there is a risk that if we do take up the funding opportunity, that within our community that is perceived as support. So I think we've been very clear as a council that that is not the case, that we do not support, and certainly from the Department of Internal Affairs and indeed the Minister herself has been very clear that even if we do take up the funding, we are still an independent organisation that is able to voice concerns over the water reforms. With respect to the projects that have been put forward, I just wanted to provide a couple of updates with respect to that shortlist. There was a very last minute addition to the list of projects, which was the Resource Recovery Centre. I managed last night to run it through the spreadsheet, not peer reviewed, but in terms of just as an indicative comparison, that would score us as high as the urban mobility program. So not the top scorer, but certainly sitting second there, on the basis that the project was consulted on through our long-term plan and was supported by the community, and it sits in year 4 of our current long-term plan. The other one is, in fact, the Urban Mobility Program, and I just wanted to signal that the Waka Kotahi have recently announced a new funding opportunity within the Climate Emergency Response Fund, and it's called the Transport Choices Package. And they are looking at supporting those councils that are captured by the Tier 1 legislation, the higher density housing enablement legislation, to say that actually there is some funding required in terms of supporting some of the multimodal shifts that we need in our transport system. So for our urban mobility program, it's looking like there will be an opportunity to pursue funding within that program. Again, similar to the Innovating Streets program, with a higher funding assistance rate than we currently have in terms of our normal 51%. So as high as 90, but then that balancing of local share to derive maximum benefit. So I just wanted to cover those two off as well. And the other one, I guess I just wanted to also differentiate. There was a funding announcement last week where the Associate Minister for Local Government made an announcement about Water's transition funding, and just confirming that the Waipa's portion of that is looking at around $539,000, and it's all about the costs we incurred during this transition phase in terms of the responding to requests, secondment of staff into interactivities and things. So that is not a part of this funding application as such, just to be very clear. So, but happy to take any questions on the paper.
Dawn, just before I ask any questions, just as a point of clarification, the tranche 1 funding is 5.24 million, or 5 million round figures. That's basically taxpayer funded grant or whatever you want to call it. And tranche 2, so effectively, taxpayers are footing the bill for that one. And tranche 2, the 15.73 million, is the funding that would come from the new water entities and would be a charge on to the whether it's a water charge, sewage charge, or somehow how they're going to collect the money for the stormwater. So we'd be sending out bills to our ratepayers effectively, or consumers, and they would have that extra money built into their charges.
Yes, you're correct in terms of the first portion of the transfer funding is crowd funded. Yes.
So it'll be tranche 2 that would, if we didn't pursue this, we could potentially be funding a portion of that 1.5 billion that's left across the country.
Yes, correct. Yep.
Yeah. Discussion and questions. Yeah, Phil.
Thank you. Thanks, Dawn. Martin. With regards to the shopping list there, the tranche 1, if this gets passed through today, can we contribute towards, or can other things be added to that list? Is that list cemented, basically? What you've got there for tranche 1, those projects, is who came up with those projects, and can there be some alterations or additions or subtraction, take some off, or there's other things that I'm sure everyone has got that would like to be part of tranche 1 and 2. So.
Through you, Your Worship, the criteria set by the DIA for the funding is very tight, and there is an expectation that it is that these are projects that have already been consulted on within our community, and so therefore we've looked very much to projects that are within our long-term plan, but not in years 1 to 3, so that we have a level of community commitment and understanding around them. So, so as Gary alluded to, it's the projects that are arising out of Ahuaki, out of our spatial plan, will be possible to be considered for the tranche 2 funding, and it also provides us an opportunity to take them through the 2024 long-term plan and undertake that consultation with stakeholders. So whilst it's not a fixed shortlist, it's certainly what we believe to be the projects that fit the criteria of the DIA. But if we've overlooked some, then absolutely happy to relook at others.
Yeah, Phil.
Thank you. And I mean, it seems a bit ironic that we have to get approval from DIA when this is a taxpayer handout sweetener to get this through. So, they're setting the rules, aren't they?
Thanks, Phil. You've probably hit it on the head there. Susan.
Just actually got a question. Jim, have the Communities for Local Democracy expressed has there been discussion around this better off funding? I'm just curious to find out where the other councils that have committed to the Communities for Local Democracy sit on this. Has there been a preferred sort of option of saying, no, we're not interested, or is it just essentially, take it back to your councils and do it as you want?
Yeah, so look, from at the moment, it's very much councils having to make their own decisions on the principle. I can't obviously speak for all of the 30 odd other councils that are in the Communities for Local Democracy, but I'd have to say there's a great deal of unease about the value we're probably going to place on our principles in terms of opposing the Three Waters reform and it's hard to actually see that the amount of money being offered is anywhere near compensation for what will be lost. But on the other hand, you've got the benefit to the community of whatever their share of that 500 million is. So no, to answer briefly, there's no fixed view, but as I say, there is some unease that it is being seen as a sweetener, as a bribe, to put it bluntly. Yeah.
Just
Roger. Oh, sorry.
Just quickly on that. I mean, we all reported that we went to conference this year, but I had the opportunity to go to conference last year too, and witness Jacinda with her smiles giving us another big handout at that conference when she announced the funding for everybody. So that was a year ago now. So.
Roger.
Unmute. Good. Yeah, thank you, Dawn. I want to, if I may, go to page 10 of 16 of the paper. Now then, it states at the top of that page that we will be required to sign a legally binding funding agreement with the government. And then on the third paragraph, it states, signing the agreement will oblige Council to collaborate and cooperate with DIA and its National Transition Unit to provide for the implementation and carrying out of certain parts of the Three Waters Reform Programme. So that to me is quite clear. If we accept this first tranche of funding, we are therefore obliged to go forward with the Three Waters Programme. And I'm just wanting you to clarify that that is the case. I can't see how you could differently interpret that.
Thanks, Roger. Yeah, Andrew?
Thanks, Your Worship. Yeah, I think that is quite clear.
Oh, sorry. Can I just...
Yeah.
There wasn't a request for Dawn to answer that and to confirm that that's the case.
Yeah,
sorry.
Yes, thanks, Roger. I was going to get Dawn to answer it, but I thought Andrew was going to add to that question. Okay, sorry. Dawn?
Thanks, through Your Worship. In terms of the agreement, that is very much taken from the funding agreement provided by the DIA, although we've had representations from the Minister, from the DIA themselves, who have said that you know, Council can still take an independent or an opposing position on the reform agenda, and hence why the Community for Local Democracy group sought amendments to the funding agreement in terms of being very clear around those, getting those affirmations in writing.
But further to that, you're saying that you've already had a verbal statement from DIA. There have been no changes made, even though requested, to the funding agreement. And that funding agreement's a legal document.
Thanks, Roger. That's certainly my understanding. The request was made to change the wording, but that hasn't happened. That's correct, isn't it, Dawn? Yeah, Andrew.
Thanks, Your Worship. So I just want to make the point that no matter what's in the agreement and whether we sign it or not, the government can require us to do exactly that. We're a creature of government. To me, it makes no difference. So, and while I understand the principles regarding you know, that you're approving of the Three Waters thing, and of course individually I do approve of it. It's also a principle of, do we allow our ratepayers to be worse off by not accepting this funding now? You know, and to me that takes precedence anyway. So yeah.
Mike, and then Marcus, and then Claire. Yeah.
Thank you, through your worship. Yeah, look, just off the back of the conversations, I guess I've got a couple of clarifying questions. Is if this was motion to go through to go and explore some of these options to bring back to the 20th of September, where you're asking the council to actually then make a final decision, really, whether we pursue whatever comes back or otherwise, which I personally think is probably a sensible approach, and then it gives our ratepayers, who we represent, I guess, the full opportunity for us to make a really well-informed decision. And I don't think we've got all the information here today to make that, but it's a personal point of view. The other thing, though, is I do have concerns. I've got a question around, so if this was approved today, what are council going to be bringing back? Are they going to be bringing back on this matrix just number 1, 2, and 3? If we threw in the recovery centre, which you've alluded to sits at probably number 2-ish, how many proposals would you bring back for the council to consider and consult with mana whenua, etc.?
Through you, Your Worship, the shortlist that's shown in the recommendation in the report of B, with the addition of the Resource Recovery Centre, would be the shortlist that we would take through to consultation and gain feedback on, is what the intention is.
Right, yeah, thanks, Dawn. So I guess one of the things that we could do is we have to make a decision as councillors on that shortlist, whether it's an appropriate shortlist, whether we want everything on there. That's just the way I see it. Yeah, before we even make a decision on whether we support this or not. I think we need to look at the stuff in front of us. Some of that stuff down the end, I do struggle with. And to me, if council did vote yes with this on September the 20th, I think it needs to be a benefit to the wider district, and it has to be perceived to be a benefit to the wider district. Now, one could argue that you take one project and you can say, well, it sits within Waipa, of course it's a benefit, but that's not the reality of a lot of ratepayers probably. So, yeah, hey, I'm open to this going forward, and the staff doing some work on this. I would like a further discussion on this personally, around whether all those things should still sit there, because they're all going to take time to consult around. And then the information to come back, and without us saying yes or no and making a decision today, giving ourselves a couple of months, to probably do a bit more homework ourselves, get a bit more feeling from the community, based now that we have X amount of things to look at that this money could be spent on, and then come back and make a decent decision on the 20th.
Thanks, Mike.
Quickly, through your worship, I just want to respond. I actually agree with what Mike was saying. The big issue here is with that list, it's actually got to be passed by DIA. So whether we want it or not, it's not the point. It's actually got to comply with some very tight regulations. And so some of that list could vanish and not be able to be put up if DIA do not accept them in their current form. Am I correct in that assumption?
Through your worship, all of these projects we believe meet the criteria. So a copy of the report has been shared with John Mackey. We haven't had any feedback as yet, but we're expecting that all of those meet the criteria. From there, it's that decision, absolutely, in terms of, do we want a sort of a pepper pot approach? Do we want to pick a single favourite or two favourites and say they are the keystone projects? So that's the feedback that we're looking for, but I do believe that all of them are candidates that would meet the criteria.
So just for the debate today, I think if we start going into that shopping list and deciding whether that's the only project that we're considering or not, it's really the decision whether we're going to move ahead with this application, I suppose, for the funding or not, or whether we're going to do some further work on establishing that shopping list before the 20th of September, and we have got some time to make that decision. So, but I think if we get down into the detail today on what's on that list and what's not. We're going to be here till next week. But sorry, Marcus, I cut across you. Yeah.
Yeah, so I support Andrew's comments. I think that our ratepayers don't want to be left behind if we don't go ahead with it. I support the development of the Resource Recovery Centre. I think that's important for the district and for our future. But I mean, the shopping list also we have to work with iwi on this as well. So they might not even agree with these projects anyway. So yeah, I'm supportive of this suggestions.
Clear. Sorry.
So I'm coming from an even more fundamental principle, which I feel is being violated, which is our funding and revenue and financing policy, which we generally say for any project that we are going to implement, the people that pay for it, you know, like they should be the ones that benefit from it. And half of this funding, I understand, comes from future water charges. And I don't know how you can justify that we could have some kind of project that might benefit the general public and anything that isn't to do with water that would be funded from future water charges. It absolutely violates that policy, which has been a foundation for all of our work. And so this means that we are committing, like even if we get over that somehow, which I haven't been able to, if we commit to any of these projects, we are saying we think it's fine for us to have our ratepayers rated from water charges and perhaps like build new libraries with them or a resource recovery centre. You know, like I think it's really dangerous territory for us to go into. And I'm really disappointed that the DIA is pushing this through when they realise that it's putting councils in an extremely difficult position. Furthermore, we already know that the National Party have said if they come into power, the next election, they will undo this work. I would be concerned that any funding we receive, knowing that we will be expected to pay it back. We won't be able to keep it. And so we haven't had any assurance on that. We haven't had any assurance on the changes that have been requested to the funding agreement, which I think are really sensible, prudent, absolutely needed. And I wish we didn't have to make this decision until we had a definitive answer on the request that's been made, you know, through the communities for local democracy. Yeah, so that's where I'm standing. I'm not likely to support this at all.
Clear, thanks, Gary. And then Andrew, did you have something? Yeah.
So just in terms of the funding sources, Claire, tranche one is the taxpayer funded tranche, and that's not dependent on the Three Waters entities necessarily being stood up, whereas tranche two is funded via the new Three Waters entities, and that is dependent on the Three Waters entities being stood up. So that's why we're saying there is a potential risk that tranche one would disappear if you don't take advantage of it now.
Thanks for clarifying that, Gary. I still think that in the finances of government that they will be saying that money that we paid in tranche one, it was for Three Waters, and it's actually going to be part of the debt that Three Waters, those entities are going to have to manage. So even though you say it's from taxpayers' pockets generally, I don't have any evidence, but it's something that I read early on that it would be likely to be sort of put into the capital requirement, you know, that those water entities are going to have to manage. So thanks for the information, but I'm not sure if it's still untagged for the water entities.
Perhaps you wish to Dawn could clarify, but I'm not aware that there's anything in the funding agreement that would suggest that this money needs to be paid back if the three waters entities ultimately aren't stood up. This is a funding agreement that you're being asked to consider, at face value.
Three worship, certainly nothing that I've seen or even heard being talked about in terms of those sorts of conditions being applied.
Yeah, Andrew.
Thanks, Jim. Yeah, look, I think I understand your concerns to some extent, but the reality is it's not us acting in violation in any way of our financing policy. This is a directive from the people who, tell us what to do. So I really think that concern is not justified.
Roger?
Yes, thank you, Major. Listening to the suggestion that, in fact, putting further work into this concept of funding projects would make us better informed in September when we come to a later decision. I actually can't see the government of the day making any change to their position on Three Waters within the next 3 months. Yes, there may be a change of government, and yes, there may be Three Waters thrown out, but that's not going to happen until well next year, if and when it happens. I see, as a council, we're not likely to change our position on Three Waters between now and September. So we would still then make the decision that we are not in favour of going ahead with Three Waters. So I can't see how putting further work into this is going to better inform that decision in September. I also kind of worry, we've heard at council meetings and committees over the last couple of months that our staff are really stretched. They're having difficulty maintaining some of their targets on some of their outputs. We know that and we sympathise with them. And that's the environment which COVID had put us into. So we're really asking staff to put a considerable amount of work into this table of projects when it's unlikely that we're going to change our mind. So I think our staff have got better things to do than keep chasing rainbows and looking at this pot of gold at the end of that rainbow. So I'd be against them even looking at those concepts. And that's without me going in to talking about those. And I certainly wouldn't agree with the list that we have in front of us. And am I right to assume, you say we've got to go out and get iwi feedback, but surely we'd have to go back and get the feedback from our community on this, because again, do our community agree with us progressing this and an inference that we're in favour of Three Waters? I don't think so. So I think the whole concept is flawed, and I'll be definitely voting against it.
Thanks, Roger. Mike, and then, sorry, Susan, and then yeah.
Yeah, thank you through the mayor. Yeah, just to counter what sort of Roger said there. The beauty about 3 months is it is three months to do some work with the community to get some feedback. Now, I guess I'd be expecting us to go and do exactly what Roger's talked about, is actually using this 3 months to go and engage with our community, to go, because we really haven't formally done this. You know, we sit here around these tables, but we actually formally haven't done this. We've got 3 months. 3 months is enough time to bloody put a survey monkey together, or whatever it is. That's how simple it is. A straw poll type thing, and to gauge the community, to give them some options, not right now, because this has to be, mana whenua has to give some feedback, but it does say engage. Ultimately, this table makes the decision, no one else. No one else makes the decision if we go ahead with this or not. And to stifle us here today, I think is doing our community a disservice. I've actually been having the opportunity, not us, but them to have the opportunity to look at the opportunity cost of us not taking this money if that's what this council decided on the 20th of September. You know, it's $5 million. It might be much to this council, but in terms of a resource or an opportunity for our community, there's some potential real good here. So, yeah, I'm sorry, I'm on the opposite side. I'm not voting to move ahead with this on the 20th of September. I'm voting that we should be doing some more work on this and engaging our community. Engaging them just with a simple survey. It is that simple.
Thanks, Mike. Susan, and then I'll come over to you.
Yeah, through you, Your Worship. Look, I really resent, a bit like Claire, I really resent being placed in this position. I mean, this is we've been forced to make a decision on something that sits in kind of quite a high trust sort of situation, and the lack of a lot of clarity around a lot of things. And I guess if you look at the history around Three Waters for us thus far, we've kind of been burnt a bit. So I feel like that trust doesn't really sit there in terms of our engagement with DIA in a broader sense. I'm also concerned with the fact that the funding agreement, as pointed out by Councillor Gordon, suggests that once we commit to it, we're committing to it lock, stock and barrel. And I'm also quite anxious. The lawyer in me jumps up and says, don't trust an assurance written in a phone call or even in a letter. The actual legal document needs to be signed. And I guess I see the inclusion of clause 4.3C5, which is, to my mind, the muzzle clause. It needs to go. If there's a real honest commitment by DIA to us being able to express our own views and not have it grounds to terminate the agreement, namely remove the funding from us, that needs to go. So for me, that's a bottom line. I take huge assurance, though, Dawn, from your the note that you've mentioned on page 6 around that option 3, which is sort of along Mike's line of thinking, that committing to our agreement today to progress further investigation according to that shopping list isn't signing our soul away. It's just asking you to undertake some more investigation in it, and that time to make that decision is in September, I guess, in its totality. But I say that with a great deal of resentment, because I'm not very good at being told what to do as a local government elected member.
Dawn?
Thank you, through your worship. The one thing I would note, though, is that if we do proceed into engagement with mana whenua or the wider community, if that's what we're looking for, but wasn't foreseen in this report, we are raising expectations. And so I think we need to be, if there is limited opportunity or limited expectation that we proceed with a funding application, we've got to be very careful about raising expectations in the community that these projects are going to progress at pace.
Yeah.
Mark?
Yeah, but just to respond to that, I think our community, I mean, let's say it does come back overwhelmingly from the community that we should pursue this. Then Roger's comment that the decision, no one's going to change their mind here. Well, no one's got a crystal ball. There's an election coming up for a start. All these are just reality checks. If the community speak, it is our job individually what we do with that. And that's all I think the community deserve it.
Thanks,
Through
Mike.
your worship, I'd like to actually support what both Susan and Mike have just said. I think the one thing about Three Waters that's really got to be considered is that the general public have had no say. They're frustrated out there. I was stopped in the street on the way over here and had quite an earful. They have had no say. And they think that we're doing all of this in isolation. And the problem is that the government has not allowed us to communicate. We were actually directed not to communicate. And this is the thing that I agree with Mike, that perhaps we should go out and consult with every and with the public. I do realise that we could raise expectations, but we don't need to actually list that. We need to say that this is what they're offering us, why, and what we need to do. But with the quantum, that in doing this, we could be actually faced with a bill if it changes or the legislation changes at some stage. We don't know whether that first tranche is going to be fully funded or not. Just to note, and I'll put this into the perspective, the Reserve Bank today has gone back to recapitalisation Okay, so it asked for 8.8 billion out of Treasury. Okay, that's going to take a lot of funds out of our economy. The day of quantitative easing is gone, so the government's going to be finding itself very short of money soon. So these things are all operating in this vast area that we call. So we've got to be aware of these things happening and stand back and say, well, are we going to get this money? If we do, are we going to have to repay it? But I would ask, like Mike said, about come back to the original agreement. We have to consult because people are frustrated. They really want to get into meetings. We held a meeting in the Community Sports Club, didn't we, Tim? And there at that meeting, we had a huge crowd against Three Waters. And the people wanted their best say, but they can't.
Thanks, Lou. Yeah, Graham?
Bishop? Yeah, I'm really against this. You know, the lolly scrambles there. The money's been dished out. It's our money. We end up paying for it, whether it's the taxpayers or in the water bill. The clause that Roger has read out to us means that you accept this, you're in Three Waters, exactly where people do not want to be. I can tell you the outcome of, if you do a survey, Mike, it'd be 90% against it. People stop me in the street. People ring me up. People email. That's how bad it is. Look, the agreements with DIA are not worth the paper they're not written on. You know why? Because they've changed the staff several times, reporting back to local government. They've taken one lot away and put in a fresh lot just so they can get their wind. There's a principle here, a really good principle, and I don't want to sell my soul to the Three Waters. My constituents have said loud and clear that they don't want a bar of it. And I think we should go along with that. Just because there's 7 or 8 projects on there, it just doesn't look right to me. We got into the local government New Zealand for signing an agreement with Mahuta to say that they wouldn't oppose the Three Waters reform. And we hooked into local government New Zealand big time about doing that. We were really, for want of a better word, pissed off. And yet we're really going to be snubbing that and sort of hooking into the Three Waters by the back door. Yeah, I haven't slept well last night.
Bruce, and then
Thank you, Your Worship. I'd like to back the bus up a bit and ask Martin a question on this Three Waters issue. Everyone I've talked to, and I put a little theory out, and I suppose a few of us have too, that if we were to fix up the council that were less efficient and not performing, say that this is a government, would that have not been a better option than us wasting all this time, staff time, our own time, the community's really getting aggro, and fix up the ones that needed help rather than change the whole system? Any theory on that?
Common sense, Bruce. We don't need that here.
yeah, Martin, I don't know whether you've got a quick answer to that, but yeah. Look, Bruce, that's the nub of what we've been arguing all the way through, and why Three Waters Communities for Local Democracy got going. Phil.
Yeah, just quickly on what Claire and Graham were saying around funding and charges and things like that. I mean, it's just a real slap in the face of our ratepayers, taxpayers who have been funding this for decades and got our infrastructure to the high standard it is. So, yeah, just giving these handouts and all that sort of stuff. So.
Yeah. Okay. Well, I think we've been around the traps, and everyone has had a say that wants to. I'm really conflicted with this. I've got to admit. Again, my opening comments at the beginning of the meeting in terms of basing our decisions on facts is just getting eroded with this, because initially when the Communities for Local Democracy and Local Government New Zealand were actually talking to DIA about the costs associated with the reforms. And the proposition was put to the DIA basically along the lines that there were going to be huge costs for local government in the reforms, and that should be funded by DIA. So my understanding with the proposition that went to DIA initially was that this money was necessary because of increased costs that councils would be incurring across the country in actually working through the reforms. $2 billion is a huge amount of money that's now spread throughout the communities across the country. And the politest way I can put it is it's a sweetener. It's not logically based on what the problem is. We've been told by DIA that our water infrastructures are in a mess and it needs a huge amount of money to fix it up. And yet they're prepared to give out $2 billion effectively for a lolly scramble, spread it out through councils across the country, not based on the state of our infrastructure, but based on the socioeconomic status of our various communities, the population and area, which don't relate to our water supplies at all. So theoretically, if our water supplies are in such a bad state, why isn't this money actually allocated to fixing up what the problem is that's been identified? So I really struggle that this is legitimate funding that should be going to communities. I particularly struggle with the tranche 2 because we've already got our assets and we're going to be paying for it. The community are going to pay for it again. And if we wanted to raise the $15 million to fund the projects, we could do that ourselves without having it funded through DIA processes, getting our projects approved by them. We would be able to determine our own projects and fund it in the same way. The costs are still there. We're still going to be paying for it, but the water consumers, and as Claire pointed out, will be picking up those costs. So look, I think the whole thing hasn't got any common sense that Bruce is talking about. We're not focusing on what the perceived problems are, and that $2 billion would go a long way to sorting out water supply problems throughout the country. It's 1% of the so-called 180 billion that we require to fix up waters across the country, whether that's the right figure or not. So look, in principle, I just don't agree with this. I think that we should be moving forward and consulting with our community and using this as an opportunity not only to talk to iwi, but our community on the projects that have got some potential. And in that discussion, we need to be asking whether the community agree with a principled position on whether or not to take it anyway. But at the end of the day, from a community point of view, we can't turn our nose up at $5 million. I don't think that's a legitimate decision to make. But I suppose it's what value you put on your principles, and I'm just really thinking about the community and what we could do with that. But that's the first $5 million because, and as I say, it's taxpayers funded, so it's still coming out of our pocket somewhere along the line. So it's really challenging for me. So I'm really open to go with the majority here, but I do have some really principled concerns over this. Yeah. Mike.
Yeah, Jim, and I think you summed it up really well. In whichever way people vote here, I think everyone is probably deep down conflicted one way or the other. Whichever way this goes, there is no great outcome here. But yeah, I'll leave it there. There is no great bloody outcome there. We're going to upset half the community whichever way we vote.
Andrew.
Just a very short comment. Look, from where I sit, to refuse to go forward with this recommendation as it's drafted would be cutting our noses off to spite our faces. Simple as that. I understand the principles that you have, but this is not actually agreeing with the Three Waters concept at all. It's quite, that is related, but it's not saying that we agree with it.
Thanks, Andrew. Mike?
Yeah,
And then
I'd totally
Marcus.
support that, Andrew. And I mean, if I vote one way today, doesn't mean I'm voting for this on the 20th of September at all. I'm voting to keep this thing a bit more, some more information to be gathered from the community, really.
Yeah, Marcus.
So stop us from going in circles, and I'll move the recommendation.
Do I have a second?
Last quick question before I will second that too, Marcus. But just a question. It says here on the projects that we're actually raising, and it's under climate change, proposed projects for the Better Off Tranche 1 funding are assessed against several criteria, including supporting communities to transition to a sustainable and low emissions economy. Now, that's quite distinctive. So something like Te Arawa mightn't be sustaining a low emissions economy. It's just something, and including building resilience to climate change and natural hazards. So there's quite a criteria in there that we probably fulfill. DIC would probably be pushing that along with their criteria. So in seconding the motion, I agree with what Mike and everyone was saying. I think we progress this, but I certainly agree with Mike too. That doesn't necessarily mean I'll vote for the issue at a later date. That over. I've lost my.
Thanks, Lou. Just having computer problems here, but we'll be right in a minute. I've got that worked up. I've mucked up my password. Sorry about that. Okay. So look, as I say, we've had a really good discussion. So we need to work through the recommendation. So Marcus, was it you that moved? Sorry, missed that. But I think probably we could go through it in pieces rather than the whole recommendation. So obviously receiving the report, Marcus, you've moved. Can I have a seconder for 3A? You've moved. You're happy with 3A. So I'll put that part of the motion. All those in favour? Aye. Contrary? Carried. Okay. Item B supports option 3, the preparation of draft funding proposal for Better Off Support Package Tranche 1 allocation for the following short list of projects. And in the list of the projects, and possibly the development of a resource recovery centre to facilitate further work being prepared, a draft funding proposal for Better Off Support Package Tranche 1 allocation. So I'm just wondering whether we are comfortable with that, Mike?
Yeah, can we just include that development of a resource recovery centre, not as a possibility, but as actually whatever number you want to make it, whether it be number 2 or number 7.
Yeah, the suggestion would be that we delete the words "and possibly," but just include the development of a resource recovery centre at 2, since that's where it came out on the matrix. Yeah.
Happy to move that.
Thanks, Mike. So it's moved and seconded. All those in favour? Contrary? No. 4 against. Sorry, Roger, I said.
Yes, I'm against.
And we've got 5, 4. 1, 2, 3, 4. Lou, where were you sitting? You're in favour?
4 opposed, Your Worship.
Yeah.
Who wants their names recorded? We have Councillor Webber, Councillor Thomas, Councillor St Pierre, and Councillor Gordon. Against.
Yeah.
Yeah, I'd like my name recorded.
Yeah, thanks, Roger. So the motion's carried. C, supports the engagement with mana whenua and iwi to assist. Item C, so are there any, can I have a mover and seconder for C, Marcus and Mike? No, sorry.
So we've talked quite a bit, sorry, through the chair, we've talked quite a bit about here about consulting with our community. Is that a give me or does it need to be put in here? I mean, I know consulting with mana whenua is a have to. I just want to make sure it's not missed. If we're comfortable that it's going to happen, but if it needs to be put in here.
Yeah.
So your worship, the projects that are in part B of the resolution have been consulted on and supported through the LTP process. It's whether you wish to go back again and reconfirm that. It's not necessary for the funding agreement. It's the requirement that DIA has asked us to follow up on is to engage with iwi and mana whenua.
Right, and in that case, I'm comfortable with that. I think a discussion needs to ensue after this, just around the talk around what does engagement with the community look like, because it's more complicated than.
Yeah, so I'm a little bit confused with this, because if mana whenua come back and say we don't agree with any of those 7 proposals, we've got our own list, then at what point do we have that discussion to actually determine what is actually going to go forward to DIA for approval?
So the requirement is to engage, and we will then bring the report back to this body to make the decision in light of the information that comes out of that engagement. This is the governing body that makes the decision.
Through your worship, just quietly, just ask a question to Dawn. Is the development of the resource recovery centre, is that actually in the LTP at the moment?
Yes, it is. It's a
So
confirmed
it
project
is
for
part
year
of the
4.
LTP.
Yes, it was. It was one of our key issues that we consulted on.
Yeah. What's
Jim,
level was
just
that?
hang on a
Year
minute,
3 or beyond?
It was in year 4, so,
Year
so
4.
it meets the
Thank you.
criteria.
Thanks. So Roger?
yeah, I'm also concerned about the inclusion of just mana whenua and iwi, because if you look, and Gary has said that we consulted in terms of the community with all of those projects, but so we did also with mana whenua and iwi. And this is a new round of consultation with a new purpose and a new allocation. So I think that if it is going to go, then the engagement with the community and mana whenua should both be included in that clause.
It's a bit of a mockery.
Yeah, okay.
Through the chair, yeah, look, I disagree with that. I think we're actually talking 2 different things here. I think the discussion we had is actually something quite separate to part C of this motion. I think it's a discussion outside of A, B, C, and D.
Susan? And then-
I'll, with some hesitation, move C, merely on the basis that it's a requirement, a direction from DIA to undertake it. I'm not saying I necessarily agree with the process in and of itself, but it's a requirement in terms of this entire package. I do have a hesitation around relying on consultation with the community at large under our LTP. I think those were different circumstances at the time. Funding was not of this nature, so I treat that with some skepticism. But in the interest of trying to address the issue that we're all reluctant to at the moment, I'm happy to move C.
Thanks, Susan. So it's moved.
Yeah.
Yep.
Second, with much the same sentiments.
Thanks, Andrew. So we have a mover and seconder for C. So I'll put the motion. All those in favour? Contrary? You're against? Well,
So we have 5 opposing voices on the show of hands. Councillor Coles, Councillor Gordon, Councillor Thomas, Councillor Webber and Councillor St Pierre. Have I got them all?
Yeah, so on this particular issue, because it's actually a requirement that we actually consult, I'll have to go with the supporting option C, because if we don't do option C, nothing will happen, because effectively, if we get to the 20th of September, we make the call to actually lodge the application for funding. If we haven't done the consultation round, we won't get it either way. So effectively, that's my reason for supporting C. So if I need my casting vote, that's the way I'll cast. So is that what we've got around the table? Yeah. Okay, so we can record that. So I'll put that. Oh, we've done it. So passed on my casting vote.
Your Worship, can I just ask a question about that? So who in the council is talking to mana whenua? Because we never hear the debate, the talk directly. We just get a recommendation. Like, is it the chief executive? Is it Dawn? Is it like, who are they?
How are we going to do it?
Dealing with?
We'll have to pull a program together, Your Worship. We have, by way of example, a joint management agreement meeting tomorrow with Waikato Tainui. We will have to contact Ngāti Manipoto, Ngāti Rakawa, and Ngāti Wetoko Waipa for a discussion as well. And we'll report the outcomes of those discussions back to the September meeting.
Okay, so that's item C covered. And the item D is request that staff report back to the Service Delivery Committee on the 20th of September with a funding proposal for tranche 1. Moved Marcus, seconded Councillor Lou Brown. Yeah.
Councillor, sorry to labour this, but the 20th of September is the last. There's the first and last opportunity the council's got to actually discuss this. I'd be quite comfortable putting something in there giving us the option of a workshop previous to this if it's required, because it's a big decision to make in one meeting. And there might be, I don't know, do we need a workshop or can we just make it? But there might be some final little questions that we need answered that we're not going to have the opportunity to actually send staff off to actually do. I'm not saying we definitely need a workshop, but just the option if required.
Yeah. Okay, Gary, do you want to comment on that?
You probably don't need it in a resolution, but I can commit to bringing this back to a workshop prior to the final meeting on the 20th of September. That's the Service Delivery Committee meeting.
So, yeah, soon. Yeah. No, I was just going to say that, yeah, that's just the final drop dead day, basically, that we've got to make the final call. But I would imagine we're going to have quite a lot of discussion leading up to that, because we've got to do the iwi consultation apart from anything else. So we really need to have a clear idea of where we're at before we get to that 20th of September. Otherwise, we'll be in a bit of a mess. Claire.
So the points that Mike raised about, getting an idea from the community, like I really support that. So could we have a resolution that covers that off as well? Because we're up to the last one now. So I just want to make sure that I think it should be in a resolution, shouldn't just be left to be handled informally.
Gary.
So I guess the question is,
I agree with the points that Roger raised, that it's moved on from the LTP consultation. It's a different proposal, and I think we are getting input from mana whenua specifically on this, and I think we should be getting it from our wider community as well.
So are you prepared to then move an item E, Claire, that requests that we consult with the community at large?
I'll second that proposal, if I may.
And Roger second that. And Dawn?
Thanks, Your Worship. Can I just maybe clarify in terms of, are we looking to consult with the community on the shortlist of projects or on the taking up of the tranche 1 funding?
Both.
Both? Okay.
Yeah. Yeah, look, I think it needs to be both, because certainly the vast majority of comments that I've received back, emails, have been really supportive of council's stance on the three waters. But to be fair, and I know for a fact that I've only had 2 comments back suggesting that we should go along with the three waters. So by far the majority is in favour of the stance that council has adopted, and the same as the Community for Local Democracy. But look, that's although it seems like there's been a huge number, it's not a scientific feedback by any means. So I think having the community give us some indication on how they feel would be a real advantage. Yeah. So, yep.
So don't want to put words in your
might have some wording coming. Did you want to?
No, I want to add another thing after we've resolved this issue in terms of that community feedback.
Yeah, so the words that I'd constructed were similar to C, but adding supports the engagement with the community to assist the council in determining A, whether to take advantage of tranche 1 funding, and B, in relation to the projects that it should put in any particular application.
Really happy with that, and
I'm happy with that wording.
Sorry, can you just read that out again, Gary? Just, or did you get that come out of your head, or? Because it was my head, I wouldn't better remember what I just said.
So the words were similar to C, except that we inserted the community instead of mana whenua, and the matters that we were consulting over were A, whether the council should take advantage of the tranche 1 funding, and B, the projects that it should use in a funding application. So we'll get those words together for you. Yep.
Okay, Susan.
Okay, at the risk of prolonging this matter any further, I wonder if there's any appetite around the table to also add an additional paragraph requesting a letter be sent asking for the removal of clause 4.3C5, which is the muzzling clause. I'm just not, a lawyer in me screams out, let's not be comfortable with just an assurance that we're able to speak freely. And I would feel more comfortable if, as a territorial authority, we actually asked for that to be removed. And if they're going to reject it, then that's fine. I think it speaks volumes, but just being a paranoid lawyer.
No, that's fair enough. Okay. So look, Susan, and you, I know we're just trying to tidy up the words, but we've got that recommendation from from Claire, and it was seconded by Roger. So when we get the words tidied up, I'll put that. But we've got another additional one now in terms of asking for that 4.3 C5, was it, to be taken out. And look, I'm happy to second that motion, absolutely. I think they've already been asked, but I think from our council's specific position, then I think it should be a request that we make. So I'm happy to second that. So what's the best is to...
So Your Worship, we're just working up a new D, which brings in the community. We will add an E, which deals with the matter raised by Councillor O'Regan, and then we'll come back to D, which will be a new F.
Yep. Okay. Okay, so look, with that work going on, and coincidentally, it's got right round to morning tea time. So can I suggest that we take a break now for 15 minutes? It'll give staff the time just to tidy up those two additional parts to the resolution, and we'll put those two when we come back. So break now and back at 22.